It's been over 6 years since I was last in India, and I am absolutely excited to be here. For me, India is so dynamic, it's vibrant, there's an energy here, and I think there is a level of diversity that unless you're here, you don't really appreciate or understand. So, Bo, I'm going to come to you, if I may, to start, which is really, the West, we understand what the West means by D&I. But what does it mean here in APAC and in particular in India? And what are some of the opportunities and challenges that are emerging across APAC?
Absolutely. So obviously, I think a lot of countries, especially in India, when you start talking about diversity and inclusion, you immediately start with the gender topic, right? Male and female. But we're already seeing in a country like India and across Asia, conversations spreading to things like racial ethnic diversity, religious diversity, socioeconomic status, LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, and so many others like disability as well. There are so many dimensions where we can start having the conversation. I think the opportunity simply lies in the fact that diversity and inclusion is a relatively new topic here, and so the opportunity to have very dynamic, very exciting conversations and to truly transform the companies that are being formed is exciting. I think the challenge, of course, is that, again, it is a new topic. And so you're looking at sometimes having conversations that will make people deeply, deeply uncomfortable. You're going to challenge people's root beliefs in what and how the workforce should look. There are people that simply believe women don't belong in the workplace. And by having this discussion, you're going to be challenged that aesthetic. There are going to be people who say, we shouldn't be talking about sexual orientation or gender identity in the workplace. That has no place in this sphere. And you have to say, yes, in fact, we do have to have these conversations. So I think the challenge will simply be that people will be made very uncomfortable. But as I always say, you're doing diversity and inclusion right when you're a little bit uncomfortable.
I think it's interesting. You talk about India, and the fact that the laws have changed in India. I mean, we here at Standard Chartered, we set up an employee relations group in 2018 as the laws changed, called GLAD, looking at how we raise awareness of LGBT, how we get inclusiveness as part of the dialogue. And in 12 months we've got rainbow lanyards, but we've also got gender-neutral toilets. I mean, can you imagine gender-neutral toilets in India 2 years ago or 6 years ago when you last came? So that energy and that power is real.
Right, exactly. We at Uber, we sponsored one of the very first LGBTQ job fairs in all of India. And it was a very simple thing to say yes to. But the amount of excitement that we saw in the workforce, and also the amount of excitement that was the local media generated from that level of, first of having that kind of job fair, then having that sort of sponsorship was amazing. So I think as a whole society within APAC is completely ready for this conversation. I think that we just have to get over some of that discomfort that's going to come alongside it.
I think that's very true. It's interesting, as I said, I was here 6 years ago, and for me, what's amazing is the speed at which Asia is catching up, actually much faster than the West, actually. The progress that has been made is actually quite phenomenal. As I said, there's an energy here, and I think, as a country, we're really moving forward very quickly in this space. How does Standard Charter manage D&I across multiple markets when the contexts are so different across country and between regions?
Yes, so you're right. I mean, different countries are at really different stages of evolution, and that evolution is happening more and more quickly, as we discussed. So, I'm lucky enough to chair the Global D&I Council. So there's some things we can do globally. We can set global gender targets. We can develop programs on inclusiveness. So we've put 76% of our senior people leaders through inclusive programs. We can incorporate inclusion in our annual people survey. So there are things we can do globally, but the real power, I think, is in empowering the local CEOs to say, against this global framework, what's your local D&I agenda? How do you develop a local D&I agenda that fits with that legal background, social background, historic background? And we're starting to see real traction with that. Even with disability, I think actually Southeast Asia has done a tremendous job in disability, setting quotas, trying to get awareness, but data is really poor in many instances. So empowering the local teams, say, let's have a globally consistent standard questionnaire, but let's try and test ourselves. Let's test our own data against that questionnaire and try and raise the bar. So I think, I hope what we're doing is getting that blend of global consistency, global importance, with local execution and real local passion to drive it through.
Peter, I'm going to come to you now, and in fact, start to get your phones out, because I'm going to be coming out to you shortly for some polling. But Peter, when you and I met to talk a couple of weeks ago, you were sharing with me the work that Ikea is doing locally to empower women. Please share with the audience what you're doing, because it's an interesting story.
I think I'm 26 years now in Ikea, and when you talk about diversity, inclusion, equality, is always part of the heart of our business, but it's also part of my heart, so also part of the leadership. And then if you come to India, and then I said, where would we like to make a difference? What is the local way you can make really a difference, what is needed? In India, it was a conscious decision to empower women in the workforce. So it was a conscious decision to have 50% women in our workforce, which is totally unusual in the ecosystem, in the business ecosystem in India. And then we decided to have them not only let's say in the natural female workplaces, but we like to say in all areas and on all hierarchical levels. So that was the conscious decision. So for example, today we have women driving forklift. We have women going to our customers and doing kitchen installation. So this is one of the parts, and we have all women, 50% of female in all hierarchical levels. We talk about that. We have flat hierarchies, but we have women there. And the next step is now what I'm doing is, what we're doing a lot is, we are now bringing local women in the managed part. We were starting with the foreigners, but now we have more than 50% of the female women also in the management team in Ikea India. That is one part, and the second part is also to engage women. When we open the store in Hyderabad and bring women to the retail part, we consciously decided also, because there's no market to hire people and to employ people. There's no real retail market also for women not existing in that part. So we decided to focus on underprivileged women coming from villages. We engaged a Disha program together with a development program from the government, with the UNDP, with other retailers, and with the IKEA Foundation. We were training all over the country more than 1 million women, and we took almost 80% of the women retail skills, language skills, how to approach a customer, blah, blah, blah. So we were bringing them to our store, and that was a real adventure and a real fantastic experience, because they were coming out of a society where you normally don't go to work. So we needed to talk in some cases with the family, with the fathers and with the mothers, with the brothers, with the husbands, and said, to bring them to work so that they're allowed to go to work and bring them in and then train them. And today we have, if you interview them, we have some fantastic videos around them. They're so engaged in the business. We have one, she says she was refusing a lot of offers to get married because she said, if the prerequisite is not I can continue to work, I will not marry that guy. So that is something really exciting. They're bringing home the money. It's for me, it's by heart. So they said, the first what I did, I bought some jewelry for my mother, or I was supporting my brother. So this is something which is touching me a lot and other people. And this is one of these good examples. Then we have had that before. We are working now supply chain. We are working with artisans. So we're looking on local entrepreneurship. So we are creating products and selling them around the world. Also women, or mainly women around that part. So it's part of our DNA, but in India, very specific, it's to have 50% women in the workforce in all areas.
I think this supply chain point is a really interesting one, in terms of how you can integrate what you're doing as a standalone business, but into your broader client base, but also into the suppliers that support you.
Yeah.
And we had a classic case last year where our group general counsel turned down a lawyer pitching for business because they turned up with a very undiverse pitch. And we've now included in terms of our spec, when we're asking suppliers to pitch for business, all aspects of business, be it stationary suppliers to logistics, to really set out what their D&I plan is as part of it. So I think there's a role that business can play, not just in itself, but to leverage that in the societies in which it operates. Same with our customers. partnering with our customers on International Women's Day. We've got 200 odd customers coming to partner with us in terms of really making this important and promoting it as something that matters. So I think there's a leverage game that we can play as well.
I think it's been very clearly pointed out how you're taking a very local approach to attracting talent here in India. So a polling question to the audience. The question is D&I in your agenda, is the D&I agenda at your organization promoted through an overseas or a local lens, or a global and local lens? Wow.
Oh, that's nice.
This is quite interesting to me as somebody who's been doing D&I for a very long time. Certainly, at least 10 years ago, this figure would have looked very different. It would have been very much a sort of global approach to diversity and inclusion, and we're definitely seeing a much more local approach being taken now. So, Bo, what are some of the impacts that D&I has had on your organization, whether it's through sort of people strategy or from a business focus?
Well, I think for Uber, our journey to diversity and inclusion has been very, very public, right? And it's one where in 2017 there was a lot of focus on the fact that we weren't getting it right. And so if you came to Uber today, you would find such a fundamentally different organization. The great thing about it is when all of that happened in 2017, our leadership said, hey, this is important. We haven't been doing it right. We will do it right. First and foremost, our leadership changed dramatically, right? And I think that was very fundamental because as you're seeing role modeling here on the stage, the single key to diversity and inclusion change is the leadership advocacy, is the leadership championship. And I think it's super important that you're seeing 2 European men sitting on stage talking so passionately about diversity and inclusion. So that's one thing that really has changed is the leadership commitment. Then when we really started doing this, we started stripping down and taking a look at every single one of our internal systemic processes from performance management, recruiting, promotion, all of that, and said, rather than simply trying to quote unquote fix the women or the people of color or simply hire a bunch of them, we said, how are our systems being designed either to validate or invalidate women and underrepresented minorities and anyone who's underrepresented, and let's fix the system. Because we know that the problem isn't the women. We know that the problem aren't those people who are underrepresented. It's the system within which they have to work. And a system that has historically told them, you have to act a certain way, you have to behave a certain way, you have to adapt to this culture if you're going to survive. If your strategy for D&I is focused on, okay, women, once you come in, you have to start acting like the men, or okay, you have to start acting like the white people, or whatever, you're going to fail. You have to say, how is the system broken? How is the system fundamentally broken for underrepresented people, and fix it. So that's what you'll see the real differences right now are the systemic changes in our processes. But our true goal is to say, how does building more diverse teams first enable us to meet the needs of our diverse customers? We have over 7 million riders who engage in our platform every single day. We have 7 million customers. And those customers are old, they're young, they're black, white, Asian, every single race, ethnicity, every religion, every sexual orientation and gender identity, every ability or disability. And we need to create an environment where they feel like we welcome them on our platform, that they are free from any sort of discrimination on our platform, and we'll only be able to do that if we have that diversity inside. So that's our true goal. And I think those are some of the changes that you will see if you came to Uber today.
Thank you. Bo, you touched a little bit on the business case for diversity and inclusion, and I just want to check with my panelists on this. So we were talking earlier about how, certainly Bo and I were talking, as we've done D&I for such a long time, that we kind of started this whole journey in equality and fairness and the right thing to do, and over the years, the business case for diversity and inclusion emerged. And we were discussing that we think perhaps we're going back the other way. If you look across what's happening across the globe, we have an awakening, a social conscience. The advent of the #2s, and the world, I think, is sort of galvanizing around fairness and equality. I'd be curious to understand from both from you, Simon, and Peter, whether you believe that the business case is still relevant anymore.
I think it's absolutely relevant. I mean, one of the speakers earlier on talked about leaving 50% on the table. You know, if you've not got 50% of your workforce female, then by definition you're missing 50% of the talent in the workforce. So you start off at a disadvantage. I think when you then start to break it down a little bit further into the overall talent pipeline, into the products that you can develop that have diversity as part of their construction, again, there's economic benefit. We launched a sustainable deposit that allowed people to put money with Standard Charter that then goes to be invested in UN Sustainable Development Goal projects. Mm-hmm. That deposit was cheaper than a standard deposit. So there's a real, people value it. And actually, plug Bloomberg, the use of the Bloomberg Equality Index is fantastic. Mm-hmm. People are proud to be part of it, proud to be associated with it. And I think that in itself has momentum that carries value in the firm.
Peter.
I have a strong belief if equality is a human right, and then this is part of that implicates that diversity agenda, if you take it really serious, you cannot say but in the business, so you have to stand up for that part. And then when we say about India to empower women, the gender equality, then turn it around. I have been working in Germany. I think it's an ongoing circle what we are into. Diversity and inclusion is also happening. If I look in Europe, for example, we have the debate about immigration and integrate people, and they have the right-wing party. If we look on US or wherever we are looking, so I think it's even more, which concerns me a bit, it's even more important that the companies are standing up and said, this is part of our DNA, this is where we're standing for diversity and inclusion. We cannot say but in a certain case. I think it's more actual than ever if we talk about that from different angles.
It's a real magnet. It's an employment magnet to be an employer of choice. I think diversity is a real bedrock of that, and certainly as more of us are competing with many different industries, different technologies now, to be able to say we value diversity and we're doing something about it. I think it'd be interesting to see the audience think, but I think that's a real attraction to people.
Yeah, but certainly the generation that's coming up into the workplace, they're expecting the workplace to be diverse in a way that perhaps when I was coming up, that wasn't the case. Yeah.
And I think, one thing that I think I always say is that genius doesn't discriminate, which means that genius exists everywhere, in every community.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not as though, right now, if you look in most corporations, the leadership is largely male. The leadership is largely in the West, people of European descent. We know that genius doesn't get distributed unevenly to that population, right? Simply that we haven't taken the effort to find that genius. Yeah. And to your point, what are we leaving on the table when we don't find that genius, right?
I think to support that, I think it's very important that if you talk about diversity, inclusion, and I think it's a benefit in itself because in a fast-changing world, there's also a war, you can say a war of talent that is one of the world, especially also in India. So you're looking for new competences, and if you're part of that, and it's brand building, it's employer branding also, it also gives you a benefit in your employer branding and retaining talent, gaining talent. That's one part, but also in the society. Mm-hmm. So we're working in retailing. So we are for the many people in all countries. You need to be part of the society. You cannot only be part of the society if you're representing the society also in your workforce and their culture.
I think that social point is so important. I think none of us can deny that we're living in increasingly polarizing times, right? You look around us at every nation around the world, and the social dialogue feels like it's getting worse and worse everywhere. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing that I've noticed in the 20 years that I've worked in D&I is that companies have gone from being laggards in the diversity and inclusion conversations actually leading in the space. And I think that the reason why is because we as corporations, we see the hyperpolarization that's taking place, and we realize we're hiring people from that space. We're bringing these people into the companies, and we can't actually allow them to exist in that hyperpolarized state in our companies because you can't get people to work that way.
Absolutely.
So we suddenly feel this social responsibility to say, if that's what's happening in society, what can we do to actually make things better, right? And I've seen this truly in my 2 decades. Companies are now leading in a way that I never thought was possible 2 decades ago.
It's interesting. We for years have done client surveys. What do you think of the products? What do you think of your relationship manager? We now incorporate that. How do you feel we, stand a chance to deliver diversity and inclusion, and how does that matter to you?
Absolutely.
Because it starts to bind you into the client.
It's a great segue to another polling question of the audience. Do you think it's a company's responsibility to influence the drive for equality around the world? How are we doing?
Wow.
Okay.
No.
I think that's pretty clear. Thank you. So, given the sort of the general mood around this, I'd be keen to know in the time that we have left just a little bit of what your organisations are doing to drive equality around the world.
So I think it's, we've tried to focus on three main areas. Talent, so what we can do to really promote diverse talent. I think some of the building blocks like flexible work, extended maternity leave and consistent maternity leave, but then also working, here in India, we're launching this week men who can lead real change. We are pushing, as I talked about earlier, LGBT diversity. So really focusing on trying to get talent coming through the firm. We focused on product. How can we support women in tech? Fintech that is managed by women. How can we find ways to support their development from mentoring and financing? And then from clients and the supply chain, how can we engage with them? So I think we're trying to build, both on a global basis and a local basis, real connectivity across those three vectors.
Perfect. Peter?
I think it starts on the top level. So that is an experience you have since 30, 40 years. If your CEO or your top-level leadership is not convinced about that, is not part of the DNA, then it will not happen. In Ikea, it is part of the DNA and it's part of the culture. So you need to create the culture for diversity and inclusion, for equality, so that's a natural part of your culture and not something on the moon or a satellite going around where you talk about on Sunday speeches. So it has to be a natural part. And then also, I think as a third part, I offer myself also to stand for that. You need to create goals. We achieve what we're aiming for, what we are measured for. Then we say we want to have 50% women in the workforce with all the barriers in India. But you set that as a goal, and that's not negotiable, and then you will reach it with all the things, and then you invest in that part, and then you make a signal and give an influence also to the people around you in your workforce, but also you give a good example, I think, for the society and for your suppliers and the ecosystem what you're working with.
In the last couple of minutes that we have left, I'd just like each of you to just share or impart some wisdom to our audience, to maybe some of the leaders in the audience, if they're going back to their organizations. What are the one or two nuggets that you can share with them that will help them to drive equality within their organization? I'll start with you, if I may, Bo.
What I would say is the conversation is still fairly new here, and any company that really truly prioritizes diversity and inclusion, you will have a huge first mover advantage. You will be able to gain a reputation from a very early stage, and you will get that brand, the employer brand opportunity from there. So even if you're sitting there going, I'm still not sure about this, if nothing else, you get the first mover advantage. So use that as your drive to really focus on this and commit to this.
Thank you.
I think lead by example. I mean, one of the best compliments that was paid to me in this week was, "You're not from HR." That's nothing.
Not sure how I
that's
take
nothing
that.
negative. No, because I think if you lead by example and show that this matters from a business perspective, I said, I'm pale, male, and stale, but I hope I can still make a difference. And I think making positive examples and really trying to show that it matters to you, it matters to your business. I think you can really inculcate that into the business.
Peter?
It's just exciting. I just don't dare, with all barriers what come, it's just exciting. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity for the business wherever we are when we talk about diversity, inclusion, equality. I'm also sitting here and working on, my successor will be an Indian woman. That's quite sure today already. I'm working on that.
Well, I'm incredibly optimistic about what I will see in the next 6 years. Hopefully I will be back before then. There is, again, this incredible energy here. particularly in India, I think we've moved the agenda so quickly. I think the momentum's with you. Keep going. I'm very excited. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Simon, Bo, and Peter.
Thank you.